After the United States, after the Second World War, when radiation was so rampant among the Japanese population, seaweed, lemons, and
mushrooms,
and no, it wasn't mushrooms, but there was one other food that they had ready access to.
Oh, they could. Oh, I see. I was taking
that helped to eliminate the radiation from the body.
Oh, good.
And the seaweed was a big one.
Oh, and you're probably thinking of, what is that?
There was a third one.
Yeah, there is,
I'm not
that
recalling.
they give now even, when you've had it, when you've been affected by it, or even as a preventative, but I can't think of the name of it. But they're getting really, I don't know if you follow Japan, but it's not good. It's not good when, and that's what I'm telling Trump and the Congress too, as far as Japanese people come over here and they don't talk about things like not, withholding information, and they actually are raising the limits, saying, oh, we can, as Americans can take more and it don't hurt us. So it's not good to do things like that.
That's an understatement, yes.
But these people that were subsidized now have to go back home to irradiated places, and their fields are radiated. And that's what Japanese government is doing. Plus, they're still trying to build more nuclear plants, and over there.
I don't think so.
I don't think they're doing it.
No, there was a big movement there. A big movement to close them.
That's good. That's good.
That's true.
So, thank you very much for coming. That was really more than dedication. So we're here with Dario Hunter, candidate for the nomination for presidential candidate for the Green Party. And this is an informal little breakfast. So if you could please, I would like to start by asking what led you to the Green Party and what led you to running for office, because that's a huge commitment.
Yes, both great questions. And I'll give you a little bit of background as to what led me to the Green Party. I come originally from Newark, Jersey City, New Jersey, both areas that are dealing with some serious aspects of, frankly, the capitalist abuses that persist in this country. I was raised in the projects of Newark for the first few years of my life. And I always saw education as the means to lift myself up out of those circumstances. But unfortunately, the cards are stacked against far too many people in circumstances like mine. I consider myself lucky to have been able to work through Princeton, through 3 law degrees, to have a successful legal career, to work as a teacher because I wanted so much to give back. I consider education to be such an important point. So it's an important area in which we can help uplift each other. All of those experiences and that focal point on uplifting fellow human beings so we could all have a fairer world, just a fairer America, but a fairer world, is what led me to the Green Party. Because when I found myself living in Youngstown, Ohio, which is where I presently live, a place that is still reeling from the economic downturn related to the steel bust in the 70s. It's in many ways a dying Rust Belt city. Its population has been halved. There are abandoned houses throughout the city. And I chose to live in Youngstown and ultimately become a member of the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education. They're subject presently to a state takeover, where they're taking local control and voice away from the community, from the taxpayers, from parents. And so I see every day the effects of that. These children who are trapped in a failing school system that then become prey to the school to prison pipeline. But what I also saw engaging in local politics in Youngstown is how our 2-party system does not have solutions for it. It is saturated with corporate interest. And some of the people that are supposed to be our representatives to solve these issues are the same people who are also, in effect, taking money from the interests that prevent us from solving them. Our local representative is Tim Ryan, who is the other presidential candidate from Youngstown. He is also one of the top House Democrats in taking money from the private prison interests, specifically CoreCivic, which interestingly enough, besides running private prisons, they also hold Trump's detainees under his racist immigration policy. And so you have these people who are prey to the school to prison pipeline, to the new the new plantation system that is mass incarceration that disproportionately affects people of color. And I knew that the two-party system was not going to provide solutions for this because they are saturated with corporate money. The Green Party does not accept corporate money. The Green Party is an eco-socialist party, which means we do not believe in capitalist interests taking control of the public good, of the welfare of all. We believe in everyone having a say, having a share in progress, in moving this country and moving this world forward. And so those values speak to me personally. They also speak to me professionally in the advocacy I engage in for the people that I represent. You know, I spoke a little bit about my dreams in education, but I now represent the dreams of over 5,000 students in Youngstown, Ohio. And I'm proud for that to be the case. Why did I get in this presidential race? Because it became clear to me, just as it became clear that the two-party system could not provide solutions for the people I represent in Youngstown, it also became clear to me that the problems they're facing are national and really global problems, and that we have to tackle them head on. They are all connected to each other. The inability of people to have their rights respected, to have their health and well-being taken into account. Youngstown is also grappling with the fracking issue and the earthquakes that we've been experiencing because of fracking, and we're not the only community. The only way we're going to tackle these issues, the ways in which human beings have been abused and cheated out of their rights, their democratic rights, their ability to progress as human beings, their right to housing, clean air, water, and soil, a decent living wage. We're only going to tackle that if we all rise up together and do so on a national and a global basis, holding hands with other nations of the world, especially the ones we've all been trained to hate and despise by these corporate interests, but also happen to be the ones we need to make peace with in order to save the planet. The only way we're going to solve these problems is to do precisely that, by banding together and showing people power over corporate interests.
Thank you.
Anybody else has a question that they want to ask?
I would like to know your position on the Green New Deal.
I am supportive of the Green New Deal, and just to lay out what that means in a very broad overview, we're talking about 100% renewable energy in this country. We are talking about ending the use and the extraction of fossil fuels and all the detriments that comes from that to our environment. And we are, of course, are talking about the many jobs that will be stimulated by that, because the fight back against people like me who are anti-fracking in a place like Youngstown is always, well, you're a job killer. Well, there are green jobs to be created. And there's an undercurrent of some of them being created now, but we're going to stimulate a system of 100% renewable energy that's genuinely going to also stimulate economic development for the people that need and deserve it, not for corporations and corporate interests, because public utilities, we will have public control of utilities so that people have a say over that need as well under the Green New Deal. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I feel that the Green New Deal, as it has been presented by a number of people, because there are so many versions of it, and there are multiple versions even internally amongst the Greens, I don't feel that it's enough. And so our campaign advances what we call the Green Path Forward. There is a tendency, even sometimes when we talk about environmentalism, to talk about what happens between California and New Jersey as what's going to save the planet. And although we have a major impact on carbon emissions, we have to have a genuinely global solution in order to save the planet. After all, the number one source of carbon emissions is China. Russia is also in the top of that list. Another country we don't have great relationships with, Iran, is also towards the top of that list, definitely not at the tippity top of that list. So once we reconfigure our diplomatic relations with those countries under what we're calling the Green Path Forward, and talk to them about saving the planet, about ecology, about environmentalism, and share with them a common vision on how we're going to reduce carbon emissions, we're going to reduce the carbon footprint, then we can genuinely not only experience peace, which is a major goal of our campaign, but also save the planet in a meaningful, impactful way. And I should point out that part of the reason why China is at the top of the list of carbon emissions is because the West is outsourcing our carbon footprint to them. Our manufacturing for the goods that we're buying here is taking place there, and the manufacturing producing the carbon footprint there. So it's our outsourced, exported carbon footprint. We have to do better. We have to do better as humankind to resolve this issue.
My name is Natalie, and I'm from Portland. one of the major items of the Green New Deal is a drastic decrease in military spending, which is the Green New Deal that was originally crafted by the Green Party in 2009, and is probably one of the major contributors to the carbon print. Could you please talk a little bit about what your perspective is on the Green New Deal, not only just in terms of green jobs and decreasing the carbon footprint and ecological sustainability, but the rest of the Green New Deal? And my other question is, another key issue for mine in the past has been the Farm Bill, because for many reasons. For one thing, rural areas are hurting. It's tied with our rural economies, but it's also tied to food production and to sustainability because of the way that the Farm Bill is structured. So if you could just say a couple of words about that, and then we're going to return the camera to you.
So when we're talking about the larger scale view of the Green New Deal, and I thank you for raising that point, the military aspect of this. My campaign is very supportive of drastically reducing military spending because frankly, we do not need to be engaging in these interventionist adventures that America engages in abroad. We want to close the over 700 bases abroad internationally. And we want to engage with countries in a more peaceful, fruitful way. So we would be investing instead in a Department of Peace. It's worth noting that the US military is the #1 institutional user of fossil fuels in the world. And so there's a definite connection between reducing military spending, taking an approach that is more peace rather than war-centered, and helping save this planet. So that's something that the Green New Deal hits the nail on the head about. We have to mention also the fact that other versions of the Green New Deal, the devil is in the details. Cuomo's version, for instance, talks about electricity, placing the sourcing for that with 100% renewable. Well, what about transportation? Major aspect of pollution. And so the Green Party's New Deals, the versions that come from a number of campaigns and have been refined to what's being presented by the party presently, is very targeted on the issues related to the diverse aspects in which we pollute this planet through carbon emissions. And transportation is a big part of that. So what is part of our solution to that, besides ending the use of fossil fuels? Well, what are you going to replace those transportation options with? We have to fund a robust mass transit system across this country. And really, people have been cheated out of that for some generations now. The push to get people into cars and the gas guzzling cars and the tearing up of interurban trolley systems, for instance. Some places those systems are coming back because they have to, because there's a need. In my hometown of Jersey City, New Jersey, that's exactly what happened. They tore up the tracks and then put tracks back in most cases in the same places for a new light rail system. What a waste. And I'm glad that people now have those options, those mass transit options now, to have more environmentally friendly options. But what about all the various metro areas that aren't served? Come from Ohio. Columbus is the largest metro area in the country that does not have passenger rail service. It's a shame. And so the Green New Deal is going to provide for those increased opportunities for transport and also greener opportunities. Sorry, you had a
and regarding to that, since you mentioned it, one of my major concerns regarding transportation is that this country is aging. And I brought this up with the League of Women Voters. What you're going to end up is a massive number of people without access to groceries, to social activities, to health, to anything, because right now we're having people who are driving who should not be driving because they're having heart attacks, because they don't see well, because they have neuropathy and they cannot feel the brakes. I mean, it is a really very dangerous situation. And it's only going to get worse because the population is aging markedly. And I think people who are older have not thought about how isolated they're going to end up.
That is the word, isolated. And there are many segments of this society that are isolated. And so when I talk about bringing people together, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about those isolated segments of society finally having the options that they deserve to be fully participating in our common effort as a society. So we're talking about those who are aging. What also, you have to include those who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic strata. You have to include the racial divisions in our country, where you have communities that are underserved because they are minority communities. And this is something I see every day where I live in Youngstown. My portion of the city in the South Side, which is considered one of the more blighted parts of the city, which has some serious crime issues, some socioeconomic issues, we don't have a supermarket in my ward, not one.
Wow.
So then you have a food desert, and that affects health severely. But guess what? You also don't have any clinics. So we're talking about transportation, we're talking about availability, we're talking about options. But if you wanted to go and avail yourself of health options, of healthy food options, they don't exist in your neighborhood. So those issues have to be dealt with hand in hand. The isolation that exists in terms of people not being able to afford getting into a car, not being able to manage getting into a car and going to another community for what they need, and also the fact that they shouldn't have to. It should be readily available in their community. So we need to end food deserts. And when we talk about healthcare, which is a larger discussion about how we as a party, and my campaign supports single-payer universal healthcare, we also have to acknowledge the fact that that is a great thing to say, but if you don't have a clinic in your community that serves your community, that understands your community, with people from your community, because we have encouraged through education the ability for people to come back and serve with those skills, then you're missing the biggest part of the picture. So I agree with you 100%. We have to orient our solutions under the Green New Deal, especially under mass transportation, towards increased access, but we must connect it to all of the other parts of our platform to ensure that people are not isolated. Now, I want to go back to the issue of agriculture. When we talk about greening the planet, we talk about having a fairer America. We're talking about a number of different aspects in which there unfortunately have been corporatist, capitalist abuses. And agriculture and agribusiness is a big part of this. And I have a personal opposition to some of the abuses of agribusiness, and some of the things that we have seen, the negative effects that we have seen, are not being discussed or described in the context of the effects of agribusiness. Take, for instance, the very jarring image that you see on television of the Amazon in flames. And if people look at this in the mainstream media and they lament about how it's such a tragedy, it is. But they're not talking about where it came from. They're not talking about how Bolsonaro let loose the wolves of corporate interest, of agribusiness, to basically abuse this habitat, this beautiful habitat, which really belongs to the indigenous peoples. So we really need to invest more in organic agriculture, community and communal agriculture efforts. This will also connect well with our plan to decrease isolation of underserved communities, because we have a serious dearth of access to healthy food. We also have a serious dearth of empowerment in communities. When we invest in organic agriculture and community agricultural solutions, we will also provide empowerment to communities over the food source that is their life source, instead of having that held hostage by the pirates of corporate interest and letting them do whatever rapacious things they want to do to our environment in order to serve their negative corporate interest. Yes, you had a.
Yeah. So what I used to organize in the South, in a state that had a large agricultural base,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the biggest issues about the Farm Bill is that subsidies are distributed by acreage of single crop.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being, there is a different way to calculate the subsidies for agriculture based on the retention of productivity of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And also focusing in, when you start distributing the subsidies to acreage, where basically you're subsidizing very large landholders who sometimes are not even from the community. You may have, a shareholder or an owner in New York getting subsidies, tons of money for land that they own in Ohio, and so that the Farm Bill needs to be drastically changed to give much more subsidies to local farms. And also in terms of food production, the one food that's actually missing in the United States in terms of production and so on is vegetables.
Yeah.
And that could, changing the equation with the vegetables would change not only agriculture, but could also change very much the health equation in the United States.
You're 100% right about the issue of production and the availability of healthy food, vegetables for Americans. Because I think people on the surface level, if you talk to them about the subsidies, they think, wow, that's wonderful. We're subsidizing farmers. And they have this very folksy, homey kind of image of the noble farmer, which does not at all mesh with who's getting these subsidies, as you have astutely pointed out. And then they think that it's relating to food. It's going to put food on the table, because that's part of that folksy image that people have. But it's also subsidizing production of things like corn syrup out of corn. And that has become an insidious ingredient in almost everything in this country now. It isn't really so much of a needed foodstuff item as it is, frankly, something that exacerbates the health crisis. And also biofuels, which some people have bought into as this grand solution for the fossil fuel issue, but they also create carbon when they're burnt. So the corporate interest in things that are produced on acreages of farms does not mesh with and align with Americans' needs. And unfortunately, that's to be expected under a capitalist system where profit is king. So we do have to completely change that paradigm. Instead of promoting, supporting, funding, defending people who are absentee landholders, who make profit off of producing things that don't really make it to the table in a country where so many people don't have fresh vegetables on their table, we have to fund and support community efforts where communities have buy-in and say on need, buy-in and say on production, and things are produced that are genuinely going to go to people's tables and improve the health of Americans. That's how our focus for agriculture has to be reshaped, and in an organic sense. Because ultimately, when we're talking about the health and welfare of people, we also have to acknowledge the health aspects related to some of the agents used in agribusiness that are harmful to the environment.
Go ahead, Kara.
Hi, I'm Kara. In support of what you're doing, I agree with both of you. And I'm going to say a word that functional medicine is using more of, and that's defining the cause of not having the structure to obtain a function to be able to resolve it. And the indigenous, they've been here for a long time, and Fisher folks. And our research is showing that our objective is to scale the earth, prioritizing toxic. Same with space, and creating a message board where we can all link as earthlings and seriously define in a collective plan with critical thinking from all of us to seriously define where on Earth. I don't want to get into climate change controversy, but we will seriously know as far as the local plans where we should start this shared focus amongst us, because too many people right now are activists. The children are getting sick from trying to define the clarity. And at the same time, I think the structure goes back to the education system, which I agree with you on. And I'm finding that science is too controversial, fragmented, corrupted, whatever, misinformed. So the reality of having local plans to initiate where students can use communities as classrooms, this has been done for ages. So humanity has solutions. We just need to reach out and define what's been used. And so I support agroecological systems with a group, SLCLA, out of Latin America that already covers the globe, but in small patches, because again, it's been very abused by the industrial agriculture, people profiting. Some of my studies go back to originally the Amazonians, where they knew that there is no such thing as a natural balance on Earth. We have to create it with our own organic exchanges. There's no black soil. They had to make it. And then when the capitalists came in and took things from them and tried to commercialize everything, these experiences are very real.
We need a question. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, well, my question, do you agree, though, that the science needs to be clarified and that the school systems should be responsible? And then this is how we can do a number of things with local plans around the planet.
Well, as far as the science being clarified, we are a party, and I am a candidate who is on the side of science. And it's interesting to have to state that because some parties and candidates aren't. We have to state that in this absurd theater of politics that we have in this country and frankly, unfortunately, in the world. So we support decision-making that's based on science. And that includes in regards to the issue of man-made climate change, because unfortunately there are deniers out there, and there are people who are fudging and shading the truth in regards to what we are facing. We have a very stark situation in regards to man-made climate change. We really needed to solve this problem yesterday or the day before, but we really have, within 12 years, really less by some estimates. So we really have to implement the Green New Deal and the provisions of the Green New Deal so that we ensure that we can have a fighting chance to save this planet. And this is all science-based. There are people who are arguing against it without basis in science. You related this issue of education to this. It is very important to focus on education, and I do that for a reason, because people in a city like the one that I serve, they have been systematically cheated. They've been systematically mis- and undereducated, and that adds to the democratic deficit. This is how you are allowed to have people put forward policies that have a disconnect from science and a disconnect from people's actual experience, because you systematically mis- and undereducated entire communities as a part of your process of destabilizing them and removing their community power. So you mentioned some interesting things about focus. We do have to have a central focal point in how we provide these changes our party and our campaign wants to advance. And that focal point for me is always this: the end of privilege, whether it be corporate privilege, capitalist privilege, socioeconomic privilege, privilege because you are a male, privilege because you are cisgender, privilege because you are white and male in a society which has placed privilege on that for centuries upon centuries. Our goal is the end of privilege. That's the focal point. And everything emanates from that. All of the ills that we see in society, from students being mis- and undereducated to those who don't have any available healthy options for food or for clinics or for basic human services, those who are suffering from the effects of earthquakes in their community due to fracking, all that comes because people decided, I am higher on the food chain, so to speak, than you, and your rights don't matter compared to mine. We all have to have equal human rights respected. And your focus on the local aspect of that, I think, is also very important, because the local experience of communities will inform whether or not we're being fair to them. Different areas, different communities will have different needs. You mentioned also the indigenous people. They as community, their communities will have different needs, and their issues, their needs have to be respected. Their sovereignty, particularly in regards to indigenous people, must be respected. And when that's not the case, what we have is a state of atrophy in their communities, but in our country as a whole, because when any part of our country is experiencing inequality, it is a detriment to all of us. So we have to bring back power to the people over decision-making, and we have to keep the focus on ending privilege in every regard.
Thank you. We'd like to show that economically, ecologically, each local plan, the locals are best to define what's toxic. They've lived it. Mm-hmm. And then to take a network seriously. And without our students, the students can exponentially help us through all of this. But at the same time, the local plan should be, and it can be creatively, and people are already looking at the dysfunction of the Gov, and they're looking at seriously creating economics, exchange and bartering. So the reality that local plans can seriously retain the controlling interest for locals. And that includes now anybody
like a refugee or displaced person, and then policy changes to show that through MSC for that for education priorities, and seriously being able to explain to the reality of the spectrum according to the other communities, so that instead of being on the street and show these economics of rapid empowerment. Specific outlets and investments in areas such as minority co-ops and minority areas for saying that empowerment we have to give them the tools that will deprive our generations so we can have a say over our own future and should have a right future for everyone in this country. So I appreciate your personal experiences in one direction of education, and seriously seeing that science is so important language for our organization. And I know there's a science where we're on the same page. But the question on the there's a time to be a child. So we talked about one time having creating suburbs these the fields. I think we're going to realize that we talk about the good judgments. But often there's no class place unless you have a car in the suburbs. And so that's a realization of learned going forward is a really deal because we depended on that car for basically 7 years now. We live in these suburbs. And that is really community kind of issue I'm going to have on our class because to that. And so anyway, I just want to have that something to think about. I just want to provide a little
how do you see the Green Party and the Green Party weaknesses? Because you've been traveling around the country, or have started traveling across the country and seeing different Greens in different areas. And from your perspective, what are you seeing the major weaknesses or things that or strengths, or what's your assessment? And if you were to cancel or suggest things regarding the Green Party, what would that be? Because you're getting a bird's eye view that most people don't.
Excellent question. And I'm going to start my answer to this question in an interesting way, kind of outlining where we're at as a campaign and where we're at as a party, because our values are connected to the Green Party's values, our Green campaign. Now, our campaign is advancing these important issues related to education, related to access to justice. We have the People of Color Bill of Rights to make sure that we deal with the ways that people of color are treated in an unequal fashion in our country. We're dealing with single-payer health care, with the right to housing, food, water, clean air and soil. We're talking about indigenous people's sovereignty. We're talking about ending corporate personhood. We're talking about local and community control. These are things that actually most Americans can agree on. When we take the negative, toxic discourse out of the picture, most Americans really agree on these bedrock values. Why then is it such a difficult sell for us to be able to present it as a party, for Green campaigns to present it? Well, you can talk about the layer of ways that our democratic system, through its democratic deficit, through the way the media operates, basically cuts us out of the message. You can talk about that. That's a part of it. But there's also some work that we can and we should be doing as a party. I'm not just a member of the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education or a candidate for president. I'm also the leader of a Green Local. I'm the chair of the Mahoning County Green Party, Mahoning County, Ohio. And I love everybody around the table that I work with. Many of them have been working at this for decades, quite literally. But the people around the table don't look like me. They don't come from the same generation as me. And that's not a mark against them at all, but it does raise some questions as to what we see as the future of our party if that continues to be the case. And so what do we need to do? And this is something I see all across the country, because you did mention this. I've been traveling all over the country and I've met such wonderful people, such wonderfully engaged people. They have been doing this, many of them for decades. It's their life's devotion. But in many places, the players don't change. The people engaged don't change. Not enough people are becoming a part of that cadre of dedicated leaders, and not enough from my generation who are leading the charge. So that has to change. And I think we can all acknowledge that we need more diversity in green leadership. We need people, we need more generational diversity. We need more people, period. So then how do we change it? We have to get out of our comfort zones. So in my local, one of the things that I say repeatedly is, where are the centers of political interest and political power in our community? Get out a piece of paper, make a list. If you had to say off the top of your head where the centers of power. Say we talk about the African American community in Youngstown, which looms large. It's a large part of the city. And they face a lot of the issues that we say are the bedrock issues we're advancing as a party. They're the ones facing it in my particular community. Where are they most politically active? In our community, in the Black churches. Have you visited the Black churches? No. If you haven't visited the Black churches, why haven't you visited Black churches? Because you want to speak to people about these issues of political engagement, but you're not going where they find, from their particular perspective, where they find is the comfortable place to discuss those issues, to hear about this. You're not going. So I make a point of doing that in my campaigns. I made a point of having connections with various community organizations, some of them religiously aligned, some of them not religiously aligned, going to Black churches in our community, connecting with all the different organizational efforts happening in our community, because we don't just want to present a party effort. We're a party, but we're also a movement. And that means people. It means connecting with people. And unless you connect with people where they're at about the issues that matter to them, they're not going to feel comfortable joining your effort. I would add to that this. When I campaigned for the Green Party, and I'm reminded specifically of the campaign we had in Ohio for Constance Goodell Newton for governor. It was the last gubernatorial campaign that we had. We had people lined around the block to go in for early voting in Youngstown. And when I came up to them with a flyer for Connie, for our gubernatorial candidate, I didn't say to them, I want to talk to you about ending the use of fossil fuels. I didn't say to them, I want to talk to you about how we're going to implement the Green New Deal in Ohio, although I want to talk to them about all those things. I believe in and I agree with all those things. But if they're wearing a union cap from the union job that they no longer have, or the job they still have and are not being treated properly by management in, I'm going to want to talk to them about workers' rights. I'm going to want to talk to them about how they're being cheated out of a fair and decent wage. I want to talk to them about how we're going to protect that and we're going to strengthen unions, because we believe that too. And that's their experience. So we also have to learn as Greens to continually improve our approach to connecting with people where they are. We may have particular interests that are big interests for us individually, but we have to connect with people where they are. So those are the things that we can work on, that I'm very confident about working on. Those are things I'm working on in my local.
I have a question.
Yes.
You were saying about going to Black churches, and I think that might be productive, but on the other hand, if a white person goes there, isn't that kind of like the white man's got the solution again? You know what I mean?
Well, you definitely want to, when you approach anyone, not approach them in any manner of condescending fashion. I think that's just general human intercourse and discussion. Just general note about how you connect with people politically. But I think the issue of a white person going to a Black church is really not as big a one as some might think. And this goes back to the earlier point of getting out of comfort zones. Because I find that when you do that, you will find a welcome you may not have realized. I find that the people that you meet may find in you an interesting line of conversation they might not have thought of or otherwise intended to engage in. And this is just how you grow a movement, because you give people the space, the breathing room, the ability to recognize something they may not have thought of before. We have that power. We have that ability. Even in a country where we're otherwise cut out of the picture, we still have the grassroots ability to move with our feet into spaces where people need the most help and connect with them.
I do believe that there's a tidal change in attitude about climate change. I think there are fewer people. I don't know what the latest poll results might be, but I think the number of people that are in denial about climate change has reduced drastically. And so, because even my brother, the conservative, he very conservative, he denied climate change until recently, and now he's acknowledging the fact that there is climate change. So I see it close to home. But I'm wondering, how do we reach those young people, like you said, because I think we as older people who have been in the activist movement in various ways for a long time, we tend to think we have the benefit of the experience, so we should be the leaders instead of handing off the reins to the next generation.
I think there's two major interesting points there to address. How do we reach the people,
Yeah.
younger people, diverse people? And there's also the issue of the generational handover. And this is an issue that's clearly not just an issue within the Green Party, because we have a Democratic primary that involves a number of candidates that question has been raised about. And we also have the likely Republican nominee, Trump himself, who is on the higher end of the list in terms of presidential age at the time of election. So the issue of how we get people on board with climate change from the younger generation is not as big a one as you might think, because the younger generation is attuned to these issues, not universally, certainly not universally, and certainly not necessarily the exact same way, depending on which group you belong to. The African American community, Latinx community, indigenous community, there are different experiences based on community, but they're aware, and we need to help plug that into activism. And there are many young people who are willing to be active on this issue. And we see some movements that are non-party movements that are cropping up, the Sunrise Movement, and disclaimer, I'm not endorsing any of those movements. I'm just noting the fact that there are young people who are moving with their feet and with their mouths to talk about this issue. So I don't think we'll find as much friction or as much difficulty as we might imagine, but we need to put the work in. We have to actually put the work in to reach out. And when we talk about the generational gap, I think we have to, it's the American politics in general, be better about that handover. It's something that clearly comes very difficult to us societally, handing it over to the next generation. But we have to allow the next generations to lead, because they will bring that vibrancy, that vitality, that new perspective on what we've begun into a new era and into a new age. If we want to progress, we're going to have to do that. We have to be able to trust our young people to lead that charge and to grow and to learn from what we've done, but to also make something new that we might not have been able to imagine.
So I think we need to kind of wrap up at this point. And to address your last point, one of the things I did in Sacramento is I was the spokesperson, and quite often social science teachers wanted the political parties to come in and talk to seniors. And I found them very receptive. Also, the junior college in Sacramento would, for extra credit, you got somebody from your political party to come in and talk, you got extra credit.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it very interesting, because I showed up at one of these and there was no Democrats, because nobody wanted to talk, bring the Democrat in. And it was a very Democratic leading area. So I found that very strange, and I ended up having to compete with a Republican and a Libertarian. So it was, but I mean, that's another way that you can reach out to the younger generations, is by going to the schools and finding out if they are looking for representatives from various political parties to talk to seniors in high school. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
That was very
Point that out.
successful.
I think because of time, because it was said that we had 10 more minutes to go, and that was probably more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm
But I
gonna
guess-
I'm gonna turn it off so we don't record a whole bunch of noise. But
So-
the meeting is still on. And